Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Elitist Geek. And forgive my throat, guys. Yes, again, took a week off work and got sick. In this video, I want to talk about Batman Arkham Knight, the shit show that is Batman Arkham Knight. I've held off on this video because of that vacation time that I took off to basically clear our unfinished basement for the building of my man cave, which was an agreement my wife and I had when we purchased this house that hers influenced the main floor, top floor. I got the man cave. And happy to say 7 years later, finally building it. So there'll be some videos on that. For those of you who've been following me since the arcade cab videos, oh yeah, the arcade cab will have a home there, as will much more geeky gaming goodness. Back to Batman. So that's kind of why I held off on the video. And I wanted to do the topic a little bit of justice. Not just, it's easy to just step up to the mic and do a bunch of ranting against Batman Arkham Knight, because it did launch horribly, and it was horribly unstable and horribly unoptimized, and those are easy pot shots to take. But let's look at it. Let's look at the big picture. Let's look at Batman's launch relative to other horrible PC launches throughout history. There were some that changed the industry. They were so horrible and they went so disastrous, the launches. They've been blamed for killing an entire industry. And if you're going to talk about Batman Arkham Knight, you've got to talk about games like that. And that would be none other than E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which I will admit to not being in the anti-E.T. camp, in as much as the timing of it sucked. A lot of people didn't end up buying it, but it really wasn't the worst game of all time, trust me. I've played a lot of games, and I've played over a handful of games that were worse than E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Trust me, there's some horrible shit out there, but it doesn't matter. That's what it's known for. It's been, blamed for basically killing the video game industry in 1983. The big video game crash has, been blamed on E.T. It's had that burden laid at its feet since then. And unfortunately, the side effect of that is a very, very talented programmer named Howard Scott Warshaw was basically tainted with that same brush. But why was the game so bad? Well, there's a great documentary out there. I'm going to link that to this video, but where it was Howard's fault, and he has no problem admitting that himself, is that he agreed to the 5 weeks. Now, typical game development cycle was 4 months to a year for an Atari 2600 game. Howard basically agreed to 5 weeks because they wanted to time it, with the movie and the holiday season. So it had to be done in 5 weeks. And if you look at the game within that context, that framework of it being something that took 5 weeks, again, there's worse games out there. Was it fun? No. I'm not going to pretend to say it was fun. But there's certainly worse stuff out there, right? And I've always maintained that I felt it's unfair that Howard got tainted with that brush because he was so very talented. And to basically have him driven out of the industry for really what just amounts to shitty timing on his part, I've always felt that was a bit unfair. But you could do a whole video on that on its own. So I would say that the E.T. one, in terms of notoriety, was leagues more infamous than this Batman Arkham Knight. Another game that anybody who's been gaming at least since the 90s, because admittedly Extraterrestrial is old school, ancient fogies like me in our 40s, but even in the 90s. So those of you millennials out there may even remember Battle Cruiser 3000, which was a game by a very well, I guess it depends on who you ask, but Derek Smart was the programmer, the dev for Battlecruiser 3000. And if you talk about video game hype and then failing to deliver, this would be the case study in terms of baiting consumers with expectations and then, the ultimate bait and switch, basically, because the game was nothing like what it was advertised when it finally did launch. And the flame war at the time, and you got to remember this was 1996, so the internet was very young. There were still pre-internet communications, that were being used, like Usenet. And actually the flame war on Usenet around Derek Smart and Battlecruiser 3000, you could do an entire thesis paper on, right? It was probably up there in the top 10 video game flame wars of all time. No kidding. So that's Battlecruiser 3000. Then you can look at all the MMO type games, right? So EverQuest, so many expectations, horrible launch, like really bad. I played a shaman, or shaman, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I played a shaman, and the entire skill system that the shaman relied on, which was alchemy, was broken. It didn't work. The game was absolutely incomplete. It was rushed to market. Most things didn't work. It was horribly unoptimized, horribly buggy, but it was the first of its kind. People put the blinders on and people forgave it, and people put up with a lot of shit that you would not put up with now because it was the first of its kind, right? Yes, there were MUDs before it. Yes, there was Ultima Online, but this was a 3D game. We're talking about a level of immersion that just hadn't existed prior to this game. But again, an absolute rich case study on how to not launch an MMO. And then, 5 years later, Blizzard does almost the exact same thing with World of Warcraft. Horrible launch. More stuff working, arguably, than, in EverQuest, but still, it was a debacle, to put it mildly. A big, huge clusterfuck debacle. And a game that I'm not so familiar with, but when I was researching for this video, Archage, apparently land and the acquisition of land was a huge part of this game, and yet within 2 hours of launching, all land in the game was taken. And the reason for that is people figured out how to exploit the system. They figured out how to bot and mod and acquire land that way. So literally within 2 hours, all the land in the game was taken. And just, again, that was a core element of gameplay, was the acquisition of land. So you can imagine that probably pissed off a few people. And then Vanguard, Saga of Heroes, bugs that were so bad, get this, so bad that the only way to get around the bug was to basically delete your character and re-roll a new one. Who would put up with that nowadays? Absolutely nobody. And yet, well, not many people put up with that either, but it was that bad. And then we can look at so we've looked at some historical games, we've looked at some MMOs. Let's look at some just regular games from the last decade or so. You've got Dead Island, which, which actually launched using a developmental build, not the final master. Can you imagine that? It actually went live online with a beta version of the game. Now, that's pretty shitty. If whoever let that go, like that's mind-boggling. SimCity 2013, anybody who's, you know, not been living under a rock the last few years, sorry guys, insect flying around in here. I'm also in a new spot because of the basement change and us going through a heat wave here in British Columbia, in Vancouver, where I live. We're 35, basically 35 to 40 degrees, and I can't sit in my regular room because it's just way too hot. I'm just like puddle of sweat, right? So you've got me sans my beanie, which I usually wear, in a nice air-conditioned room, which is our master bedroom. So if the light levels are a little off, again, my apologies, and certainly the sound, my voice, I can hear it myself, but yes, SimCity 2013. Again, an absolute clusterfuck, broken promises, lies, betrayal, offline mode issues that, you know, and basically unplayable at launch. In essence, it was unplayable. Assassin's Creed Unity, massive issues with that. I would probably not say it within the same league of Batman Arkham Knight, but pretty damn close. Like, people were pissed, right? Diablo 3, with its single-player always online requirement, and that horrible auction house, which, great on paper, one of those things that in reality is probably not so good. And to this day, you still can't play offline on the PC version. Battlefield 4, its own issues, and of course Total War Rome 2 also had a shit ton of issues. So Batman Arkham Knight, compared to these games, my argument is it wouldn't even be close, right? But it's a good thing to me. When you have issues like this in people's consciousness, you know, they're aware of these issues, it's a lot harder for devs to keep shoveling shit like this at people. The times, they are changing, right? And personally, I think the Steam refund policy changes couldn't have come at a better time. To think that, I mean, it was almost serendipitous how opportune the timing of that feature was, with Batman Arkham Knight. Like, you couldn't have asked for better timing. And I think that's really gonna land a blow to these PC companies that, or these game companies, not PC game companies, but game companies that do not take the PC market for granted. And do I think there's a danger that some devs may abandon the PC market? Absolutely. And I'm okay with that. Because if you're going to continually shovel shit our way, I don't want to buy your games. I don't want to play them. And you know what? You open up the marketplace for somebody to come along and do PC gaming right. And, you know, a decade ago, that was Stardock with Galactic Civilizations, right? And, you know, there's always a player waiting in the wings. And look at From Software. They had no intention of going PC gaming. None. There was a massive petition. People begged and pleaded to get Dark Souls brought to the PC. It did. It was a horribly bad port. But people cut them a bit of slack because they recognized that they weren't planning on doing this at all. Without the petition, there just wouldn't have been a PC version. And look what it's led to. Quite arguably, Dark Souls 2 on the PC is the best version of Dark Souls 2 available, bar none. And I would absolutely agree. It's fantastic. They really took to heart their poor experience with Dark Souls 1 in improving and coming out with a PC version for Dark Souls 2. Again, for me, the definitive version of that game. And yes, Bloodborne, I would love to see that there eventually as well. And I'm confident that we will see that. Look at GTA 5. It's definitely a game that I'm going to win for the third time on the third platform once the PC price drops a little bit. So, curious to hear what you guys think. Again, apologize for being sick, so I'm not as robust, loud probably as I usually am. But interested to hear what you guys think regarding Batman Arkham Knight. Is it the worst PC launch that you've experienced? Do you agree with some of the titles I mentioned, or do you have some of your own to offer up that I forgot about? Because really, there's a shit ton out there that I could have still talked about and that I unintentionally missed that you bring up. I'm going to go like, wow, of course, why didn't I think of that, right? But again, I think this breeds opportunity because they're either going to improve or they're going to leave the PC market. And I'm okay with that. As always, guys, curious to hear your thoughts. Cheers, and until next time.